Today's reading is Water Off a Black Dog's Back, Part 3, a short story in the collection Stranger Things Happen by Kelly Link. In late November, Carol went to the farm again for dinner. He parked just outside the barn where, malignant and black as tar, Flower lolled on her side in the cold, dirty straw. She was swollen and too lazy to do more than show him her teeth. He admired them. "How pregnant is she?" Carol asked Mr. Rook, who had emerged from the barn. "She's due any day," Mr. Rook said. "The vet says there might be 6 puppies in there." Today he wore a tin nose, and his words had a distinct echo, whistling out double shrill like a tea kettle on the boil. "Would you like to see my workshop?" he said. "Okay," Carol said. The barn smelled of gasoline and straw, old things congealing in darkness. It smelled of winter. Along the right inside wall there was a series of long hooks, and depending from them were various pointed and hooked tools. Below was a table strewn with objects that seemed to have come from the city dump. Bits of metal, cigar boxes full of broken glass sorted according to color, a carved wooden hand, jointed and with a dime store ring over the next to last finger. Carol picked it up, surprised at its weight. The joints of the wooden fingers clicked as he manipulated them, the fingers long and heavy and perfectly smooth. He put it down again. "It's very nice," he said, and turned around. Through the thin veil of sunlight and dust that wavered in the open doors, Carol could see a black glitter of water. "Where's Rachel?" "She went to find her mother, I'll bet. They'll be down by the pond. Go and tell them it's dinner time." Mr. Rook looked down at the black and rancorous Flower. 6 puppies, he remarked, in a sad little whistle. Carol went down through the slanted grove of Christmas trees. At the base of the hill was a circle of 12 oaks, their leaves making a thick carpet of gold. The 12 trees were spaced evenly around the perimeter of the pond like the numbers on a clock face. Carol paused under the 11 o'clock oak, looking at the water. He saw Rachel in the pond, her white arm cutting through the gaudy leaves that clung to her skin, bringing up black droplets of water. Carol stood in his corduroy jacket and watched her swim laps across the pond. He wondered how cold the water was. Then he realized that it wasn't Rachel in the pond. Rachel sat on a quilt on the far side of the pond under the 6 o'clock oak. Acorn sat beside her, looking now at the swimmer, now at Carol. Rachel and her mother were both oblivious to his presence, Mrs. Rook intent on her exercise, Rachel rubbing linseed oil into her mother's wooden leg. The wind carried the scent of it across the pond. The dog stood, stiff-legged, fixing Carol in its dense liquid gaze. It shook itself, sending up a spray of water like diamonds. "Cut it out, Acorn," Rachel said without looking up. All the way across the pond, Carol felt the drops of water fall on him cold and greasy. He felt himself turning to stone with fear. He was afraid of the leg that Rachel held in her lap. He was afraid that Mrs. Rook would emerge from her pond, and he would see the space where her knee hung above the ground. He backed up the hill slowly, almost falling over a small stone marker at the top. As he looked at it, the dog came running up the path, passing him without a glance, and after that Rachel and her mother, wearing the familiar black dress. The ground was slippery with leaves, and Mrs. Rook leaned on her daughter. Her hair was wet, and her cheeks were as red as leaves. "I can't read the name," Carol said. "It's Ellen," Mrs. Rook said. "My husband carved it." Carol looked at Rachel. "Your mother has a tombstone for her leg?" Rachel looked away. "You can't live without water. So that's your choice? I'm just thinking out loud. I know what you want me to say. No answer. Rachel, look, I choose water, okay? No answer. Let me explain. You can lie to water. You can say, no, I'm not in love, I don't need love, and you can be lying. How is the water supposed to know that you're lying? It can't tell if you're in love or not, right? Water's not that smart. So you fool the water into thinking you'd never dream of falling in love, and when you're thirsty, you drink it. You're pretty sneaky. I love you, Rachel. Will you please marry me? Otherwise your mother is going to kill me. No answer. After dinner, Carol's car refused to start. No one answered when they rang a garage, and Rachel said, "He can take my bike then." "Don't be silly," Mr. Rook said. "He can stay here, and we'll get someone in the morning. Besides, it's going to rain soon." "I don't want to put you to any trouble," Carol said. Rachel said, "It's getting dark. He can call a taxi." Carol looked at her, hurt, and she frowned at him. "He'll stay in the back room," Mrs. Rook said. "Come and have another glass of wine before you go to bed, Carol." She grinned at him, in what might have been a friendly fashion, except that at some point after dinner she had removed her dentures. Rachel brought him a pair of her father's pajamas and led him off to the room where he was to sleep. The room was small and plain, and the only beautiful thing in it was Rachel, sitting on a blue and scarlet quilt. "Who made this?" he said. "My mother did," Rachel said. "She's made whole closets full of quilts. It's what she used to do while she waited for me to get home from a date. Now get in bed." "Why didn't you want me to spend the night?" he asked. She stuck a long piece of hair in her mouth and sucked on it, staring at him without blinking. He tried again. "How come you never spend the night at my apartment?" She shrugged. "Are you tired?" Carol yawned and gave up. "Yes," he said, and Rachel kissed him good night. It was a long, thoughtful kiss. She turned out the light and went down the hall to her own bedroom. Carol rolled on his side and fell asleep, and dreamed that Rachel came back in the room and stood naked in the moonlight. Then she climbed in bed with him, and they made love, and then Mrs. Rook came into the room. She beat at them with her leg as they hid under the quilt. She struck Rachel and turned her into wood. As Carol left the next morning, it was discovered that Flower had given birth to 7 puppies in the night. "Well, it's too late now," Rachel said. "Too late for what?" Carol asked. His car started on the first try. "Never mind," Rachel said gloomily. She didn't wave as he drove away. Carol discovered that if he said, "I love you" to Rachel, she would say, "I love you too," in an absent-minded way. But she still refused to come to his apartment, and because it was colder now, they made love during the day, in the storage closet on the 3rd floor. Sometimes he caught her watching him now when they made love. The look in her eyes was not quite what he had hoped it would be, more shrewd than passionate, but perhaps this was a trick of the cold winter light. Sometimes, now that it was cold, Rachel let Carol drive her home from school. The sign beside the Rook's driveway now said, "Get your Christmas trees early." Beneath that it said, "Adorable black lab puppies free to a good home." No one wanted a puppy. This was understandable. Already the puppies had the gaunt, evil look of their parents. They spent their days catching rats in the barn, and their evenings trailing like sullen shadows around the black skirts of Mrs. Rook. They tolerated Mr. Rook and Rachel. Carol they eyed hungrily. "You have to look on the bright side," Mr. Rook said. "They make excellent watchdogs." Carol gave Rachel a wooden bird on a gold chain for Christmas, and the complete works of Jane Austen. She gave him a bottle of strawberry wine and a wooden box with 6 black dogs painted on the lid. They had fiery red eyes and red licorice tongues. "My father carved it, but I painted it," she said. Carol opened the box. "What will I put in it?" he said. Rachel shrugged. The library was closed for the weekend, and they sat on the dingy green carpet in the deserted lounge. The rest of the staff was on break, and Mr. Casati, Carol's supervisor, had asked Carol to keep an eye on things. There had been some complaints, he said, of vandalism in the last few weeks. Books had been knocked off their shelves or disarranged, and even more curious, a female student claimed to have seen a dog up on the 3rd floor. It had growled at her, she said, and then slunk off into the stacks. Mr. Casati, when he had gone up to check, had seen nothing, not so much as a single hair. He wasn't worried about the dog, Mr. Casati had said, but some books had been discovered, the pages ripped out, maimed, Mr. Casati had said. Rachel handed Carol one last parcel. It was wrapped in a brown paper bag, and when he opened it, a blaze of scarlet and cornflower blue spilled out onto his lap. "My mother made you a quilt just like the one in the spare bedroom," Rachel said. "I told her you thought it was pretty." "It's beautiful," Carol said. He snapped the quilt out so that it spread across the library floor, as if they were having a picnic. He tried to imagine making love to Rachel beneath a quilt her mother had made. "Does this mean that you'll make love with me in a bed?" "I'm pregnant," Rachel said. He looked around to see if anyone else had heard her, but of course they were alone. "That's impossible," he said. "You're on the pill." "Yes, well," Rachel said, "I'm pregnant anyway. It happens sometimes." "How pregnant?" he asked. 3 months. "Does your mother know?" "Yes," Rachel said. "Oh, God, she's going to put the dogs on me. What are we going to do?" "What am I going to do?" Rachel said, looking down at her cupped hands so that Carol could not see her expression. "What am I going to do?" she said again. There was a long pause, and Carol took one of her hands in his. "Then we'll get married?" he said, a quaver in his voice, turning the statement into a question. "No," she said, looking straight at him, the way she looked at him when they made love. He had never noticed what a sad, hopeless look this was. Carol dropped his own eyes, ashamed of himself and not quite sure why. He took a deep breath. "What I meant to say, Rachel, is I love you very much, and would you please marry me?"